Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of This Week in Crypto Philanthropy, where we highlight the top giving news, stories, and the power of crypto for good. Nick McLefsky, Senior Sales Manager here at the Giving Block, and joined once again by my co-host Pietro Moran. Pietro, how you doing today?
Doing great. It's crazy to see this is episode 40 for us actually. Love the round numbers. It's great to be, you know, on number 40 and soon, pushing towards that 100.
For those of you who are picking up this episode from this point, we just got back from sunny Florida where the team was all getting together. So it's great to see my esteemed co host in person. The Giving Block team came together. We had a lot of good strategy sessions. And in the spirit of just kind of playing a little bit of catch up, we've had some guests on the podcast. We were, taking some time to regroup and get ready for a really big 2025. Wanted to take this episode and use it as a little bit of like, here's what's happened in crypto philanthropy over the last month or so. We kind of do these on sort of like a weekly rolling basis, but there's a lot that happened. And so we just want to make sure that everybody gets a little bit of a catch up. So with that, here are today's topics. Going to be a nice, tight, clean episode. We'll talk about crypto markets. We'll take a look at donation stats over the last month. We usually do this on a 7-day rolling basis. There's a lot that happened just in the last week, but just want to give folks an idea of what's happened since we have been here from those earlier episodes to catch everybody up. And of course, we'll finish out with some industry news. And of course, there's a lot to talk about there. So moving on, we still have our $500 in Bitcoin when you get started with the Giving Block. It's a great way to kickstart that fundraising journey with us. So with that, crypto markets just kind of hanging out a little bit sideways for a while, right, Pietro?
Yeah, exactly right, Nick. I mean, one of the themes I've seen over the past month, and now that we're kind of back into our traditional flow, talking about markets, talking about news updates, it's been kind of nice to have some guests on the podcast because we haven't had too much in the way of crypto price and momentum in any direction, up or down. So we have Bitcoin sitting around that 86,600 mark, Ethereum right at 2,000. So we're kind of talking about things that, if you've been listening to the show before, have been numbers we've reported on in the past. And honestly, I think it's just a little bit of the early year shakeout. We got tax season coming up. A lot of folks take that into consideration. Obviously, for donations, the end of the year and start of the year matter. But when it comes to April, that's coming up in a week here. So I think a lot of folks are just kind of settling up with the IRS and making sure their books are in order before we see any sort of price momentum in either direction. Some of the notable names on the rest of the list: Solana 140, USDC. We are not reporting on price there, but we've seen continued growth. It's over 60 billion in market cap, which just means there are 60 billion US dollars that are on blockchains out there, which is really super great to see from a payments and daily use case perspective. That's kind of my fun metric I look at. And then, otherwise the rest of the ecosystem kind of just chopping along, nothing too crazy up or down. But Nick, you see anything that's caught your eye in the past month?
Yeah, no, and I couldn't have summed it up any better. As things have just kind of started to settle, a little bit of a consolidation phase, and on the donation side, to sort of maybe shift over to what's been happening over the last month. Really strong, start to 2025, as we talked about, kind of getting closer, inching a little bit closer to sort of tax day here in the United States, when we tend to see some of those donors start to make some of those tax smart gifts. So if you're looking at the screen here, just kind of running through some of the headline numbers, a really strong month. Sometimes in the past, we've seen things sort of taper off, but I would say that even outside of this month, it's givings remain pretty elevated. So we're looking at close to 4 million over the past 4 weeks. Bitcoin still leading by far. So again, for the nonprofits out there, that is still like the buzzword. Ask your donors if they've got some Bitcoin. Solana and USDC sort of in that second place. And then the Ethereum kind of fallen back a little bit. That might have something to do with some other market forces. The price has been coming back a little bit, but can't read too much into that. But that's just sort of where the leaderboard shakes out. Now, moving down the page, those last couple bullets here, those average crypto major gifts, pretty strong numbers there, $66,000, which is just pretty incredible, especially as we're talking about these donations here in March when we start to see those things kind of creep up. Towards the second half of the year. And then again, across the non cash side. So even though we talk about crypto philanthropy, the Giving Block also does, stock and donor advised fund donations. That's even had a really strong showing as well, around 51,000 on average. So for everybody who is getting ready to move into April, for those nonprofits out there, just make sure that you're including crypto as part of the usual tax messaging that you're likely already adding out there. So throw a QR code into those hard copy mailers, those emails, etc. You'd be surprised at what some of the gifts that you may see come back. So there's still a lot of donors out there looking to offset those gains. So and as you can see by what we've had come in over the last month, that $4 million number kind of indicates that, there could be some donors out there that are you're thinking about making some tax smart moves here in 2025 as well. So, Pietro, any kind of impressions on these numbers?
I mean, almost a million a week average is pretty darn good, if you ask me. I would say, from my perspective, Q1 has always seemed a little bit slower, both on the investing front. You have the Santa rally in stocks and other assets going into the tail end of the year. I think the same is true when we look at the nonprofit sector. November, December, always shaking out to be the best performers. But I mean, when you're averaging these kind of gifts early in the year, I think it just shows that we're approaching this asset class with renewed enthusiasm, even if prices aren't just shooting up 10% day over day and it's kind of peak bull market vibes. I think that's just showing the maturity and depth of the asset class and the amount of people participating, because it's not like, hey, let me give that quick gift at the end of the year and then I'll forget about it till next December. It's like more of an ongoing, recurring, kind of institutionalized giving process, which is at least my outsider's view in.
Yeah, and for everybody who's listening too, we've started to see the ETFs have had a really strong string of inflow days, and also those ETFs in general having crossed that 1 year mark only a couple months ago. So some of that stock giving could also be indicative of individuals moving out of those positions as well, taking some profits, offsetting those gains. So certainly some motivations that could be in those numbers. And I guess along with, these healthy donation stats, the industry itself has kind of been chug along as well. A lot of things that have been happening just in the last few weeks.
Yeah, you're spot on, Nick. Honestly, it's one of those periods in time where the news doesn't necessarily reflect in the price. And I think we see that a lot of times across different assets. Every week we see something very positive, very productive coming out of the industry. It's not always saying, okay, well, that means Bitcoin's going to 150 or 200,000 tomorrow, but really continuing to lay the groundwork, which I think gives a more healthy and sustained rally for the asset class versus just like boom bust, up and down. Everybody's checking their phone one week and then forgot about it the next. So I'm really excited about that. You were spot on talking about the ETFs, right? I mean, everyone's favorite words in investing are long-term cap gains, right? We're a year in because they launched in 2024 in January. We've seen the past couple of days, I guess a 7-day average of about $860 million being added into inflows into the Bitcoin ETFs, which I'll tell you what, as a crypto first person, that was like my first foray into investing. And I'd say that's like more so aligned with my identity. I think the traditional investors are showing us how it's done. They're not worried about stomaching any volatility. They're continuing to add, and it's pretty cool to watch that. I mean, when I think about crypto investors, you typically think, people who are pretty risk on and are looking for a, higher growth portion of their portfolio and allocating there. I think, some of the young crypto folks might be surprised that the older, more seasoned veterans are kind of saying, "Hey, let me take the wheel here," because almost $1 billion added in a week is no joke. But you have any thoughts there, Nick?
Yeah, no, I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, it's really interesting that that's picked back up. Maybe after a little bit of a consolidation phase, I think it's interesting that as more professional investors come into the space, there's regular rebalancing that goes on, and so these inflows and outflows are always interesting to watch. But a really strong restart, I guess. That number really surprised me.
Totally. And, I think the other thing is too, 2024 had so much going on in the industry that I think a lot of more calculated and measured folks are saying, hey, why don't we use 2025 as a great jumping off point? 2024, maybe they formulated a strategy or laid the foundation for even just how it would work in their platform under the hood. And now they can start to accelerate and grow off of what was, a bit more of a hype cycle last year or going into the tail end of last year. And now they're saying, okay, let's smooth things out, make it consistent, and approach this with a bit of clarity instead of trying to play catch up or having FOMO. Um, Speaking of institutional investors, one of the things that we consistently are seeing over the past month is more and more state pension funds and retirement funds looking at Bitcoin in particular as a diversification for the AUM or assets under management that they have. These are some of the largest pools of capital in the country. And so the annotation or the bullet point I have here is talking about how North Carolina lawmakers are introducing bills allowing up to 5% of the state retirement fund to be allocated to Bitcoin and crypto. When we say and crypto, I would say that's a smaller portion of that 5%. Most folks are looking at strictly Bitcoin. But this is on the heels of multiple states, Ohio, Texas, all looking in their state legislature to pass some form of a Bitcoin strategic reserve at a state level. I think that's really interesting. I think, the gears of lawmaking turn slowly, but the fact that folks are willing to put their names and stamp of approval on this type of policy just tells me that there's a lot of long-term investors taking a look at this pretty seriously. And I would, follow up just to maybe counterbalance my own points. We're talking about 5%. We're not talking about going all in or 100% crypto. I think this is a really smart and judicious move to say we see it as an opportunity to diversify, increase overall portfolio performance using back tested data. And and it's great to see some of these more conservative folks now finally feel ready to dip their toes in. But when they dip their toes in, like we were saying with the ETF stuff, it's hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, right? So this is no small potatoes. Um, and I think that's just going to be a positive thing that we keep seeing throughout the course of the year. Shifting gears slightly, and this one I think is kind of fun because on the show we've talked about meme coins, we've talked about people investing in stuff that maybe doesn't have the same fundamental value as Bitcoin, but it's a speculative asset. Pivoting from meme coins to maybe like meme stocks because we've had that whole Robinhood craze that we might remember from COVID. Next news story here is that GameStop reported that it actually added Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset. If I'm not mistaken, they hold a little over 4 billion in cash on their balance sheet, and they decided to put that to work. Not all of it, but some of it in a productive way, in the sense that they're holding Bitcoin in a way to diversify away from all that cash. Nick, I want to get your take on this real quick because I think it's super funny. You think GameStop, you think, oh, I remember that news story and all that stuff. And maybe I saw the Netflix documentary about it or whatever. But what do you make of this? More and more companies are jumping in and getting involved.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. I mean, I think from a treasury perspective, like I said, the wheels of government move slow. Sometimes the wheels of these treasury departments also move slow as well because their mandate is to protect that portfolio. But it's interesting to see that more corporates who are sitting on a lot of cash, and in some industries have to sit on a lot of cash.
Mhm.
That are saying, listen, if some of our cash is going to be inflated away with these elevated inflation levels, are there other things that we can do to provide as a hedge against that, or just some other way of getting a better risk adjusted return? So it's really interesting to see more of these corporates start to shift even a nominal portion of these cash reserves into Bitcoin. There's a lot of corporates that already own that. I think Bitwise is a really nice running list of the organizations with at least 1,000 Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And you can go online and usually, I'd say almost just about every week, there's some announcement of another corporate that's taken the first step into adding some Bitcoin on the books. So yeah, a trend I think we'll see continue through this year.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, when you think about these 40 Act companies, folks that are issuing shares and or public, it's really difficult to get access to other investment instruments like holding stocks or an ETF on your balance sheet. Bitcoin actually acts as a really interesting way to deploy some of that money in a way that's still compliant under their registration, right? So I think that's going to be, more and more enticing. And it's one of those things where once you see your peer group do it, you don't want to be the last person in the door. So I think you'll start seeing some of these companies nibble on a few Bitcoin here and there just to say that they're participating in this trend, which it's again very productive and I think pretty interesting to watch.
Yeah, and for the nonprofits that are, listening here, kind of zooming out as well, we talk about sort of like those risk adjusted returns. I mean, this is also another probably of a topic of that's getting a lot of scrutiny from those individual investors, who are asking their portfolio managers, their wealth managers, their registered investment advisors, hey, this trend of let's get some crypto into this portfolio because I'm seeing, the risk adjusted returns when you add 1%, 2%, maybe even 3%, producing some pretty uh, interesting and attractive results. So for the nonprofits out there, this blending of the traditional space and the digital space continues to accelerate. For some asset managers, crypto was the number one question they got in 2024. So something we will continue to see. So again, keep tapping those your donors about probing on those crypto questions.
Yeah, and honestly, great segue into the next thing I want to talk about, which is as you talk, about the traditional and the crypto worlds kind of intertwining and becoming more and more synergistic, right? We're seeing another headline out of Fidelity, which is to say that they are looking at launching their own stablecoin. So for folks unaware or just looking for a refresher, stablecoins are basically just a dollar that is representative of a dollar in a bank account that's issued as a token on chain. So the two biggest ones you'll heard of are called USDC and USDT, and those are publicly available. So basically, if you hold one USDC, it means there's a dollar somewhere, except that the on-chain tokenized version is a lot more flexible. You can send it 24/7 anywhere in the world, moves at the speed of light, all those great things. But Fidelity looking at this is really interesting to me because it says that they're investigating ways to make like the financial plumbing and architecture more efficient. And you've seen this already with folks like BlackRock who accept stablecoin deposits for their tokenized treasury bill offering. So if you want to earn a yield on your cash balance, you can actually deposit stablecoins as one form of collateral. I think Fidelity's probably looking at something similar. I don't want to speak for them, but I think that they recognize a lot of crypto investors, they hold Bitcoin maybe as like their savings or long-term investment kind of account, and then they may use stable coins as more of a liquid, put money to work type of account, almost like checking and saving, so to speak. I think they also want to offer the ability to do that under their own umbrella. I mean, Fidelity has a huge brand in the space. They're already super, super on the curve and off zero when it comes to Bitcoin and allowing their investors to get access to it. I think this will just be one other way that they ingratiate themselves to the crypto community. And I think it's just a stamp of approval. They feel comfortable issuing something with their name on it for their users, for their customers. I'm very bullish to see more and more folks like the folks at Fidelity investigating this, and who's to know, maybe every large scale investment company um, or asset manager has their own over time. I mean, that's TBD, but it's definitely very cool. Nick, want to get a comment in on that because I only got one more after this.
All to say that for folks who haven't known too many, Fidelity is very much a household name. These guys, if for their listeners who haven't been aware, these guys are also crypto OGs. These guys were mining their own Bitcoin way back in the early days. So not surprised that they've kind of come out of the gates with something like this. This is also a team that is very, very skilled. It's got a lot of experience in the space. So super cool to see.
100%. And then, staying on track with stablecoins here, we're hearing it straight from the top. So Treasury Secretary Besant has said that one, he believes the USD will remain the reserve currency of the world. All that means is that it is the primary currency that most folks look to use for commerce all over the planet, and most folks also peg their currency against the US dollar. All that to say, he thinks that stablecoins will be a part of that continued success. And one of the really cool facts and metrics that I've kind of kept tabs on behind the scenes is when we talk about stablecoins and what they represent, it means dollars in a bank. We're issuing tokens against that, and they're pegged 1 to 1 to the value of the dollars there. Those dollars in the bank are also representative of T-bills, so treasury bills that earn a yield, which allows for those tokens to then earn you a yield. So for you crypto folks out there who have seen like, hey, earn 4% on your USDC or USDT if you deposit with a Coinbase or someone similar, that's where that yield's coming from. Long story short, though, stablecoins have been one of the largest purchasers of U.S. Treasuries in the world. So bigger than certain nation states, even in terms of how much government debt they are buying to generate that interest. I think that's part of the trend here. And I don't want to dive too far in the weeds, but all that to say, I think it's a huge way to export dollars all over the world because they're on the internet, they're on blockchains, they're verifiable, traceable, and extremely easy to use. And I think that's going to help the US continue to cement itself as the center of global commerce and capital markets because it's all underpinned by $1 and those T-bills being put to work. So I think that's going to be a really cool trend to watch. And I think it's just going to only, increase the access to these, modern financial rails that we have. But you're hearing it from some of the most informed folks on the traditional side. So from the Treasury itself, I think that's a really positive considering the historic maybe skepticism towards crypto over the past decade. I think this is going to be a huge feather in our hat when we look back in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, and as something that we've said already, and hopefully we haven't started to sound so redundant sometimes, but for the nonprofits that are listening to some of the larger ones, when you think about international development, emergency response, these stable coins are becoming a really powerful tool to get much needed resources, financial resources into places that banking, infrastructure or just fiat currency just can't quite get to. Regulatory reasons, geopolitical reasons, security reasons. Stable coins have been a really easy way, fast, cheap way to move value into those areas that are really hard hit during a crisis at speed. So some of the larger nonprofits have really leaned into this side of the crypto ecosystem to drive a lot of impact. So really, really cool. It's been a busy month. Giving remains strong, averaging about $1 million a week. Make sure that if you're going out to your donors with some of those tax smart giving messages here in the US over the next couple weeks, add that crypto option in there. And of course, if you're crypto curious, you want to get started with this, or you want to pick our brains on how to do this, scan that QR code to get $500 in Bitcoin when you get started. We'd love to chat. So with that, we'll leave it here. Thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you next week.